So in this video, I'm going to tell you 3 things that would have saved me so much time as a sample maker earlier on in my journey. And I'm also going to give you examples, and I'm going to give you the exact methods that I personally use. And number 1 is less is more. But let me start by saying that I've made samples or loops that were anywhere from up to 20 tracks to even just 4 tracks, but still using the concept of less is more. Now, my main focus in this regard is frequency range, which actually makes this a lot simpler. So here I'm going to draw the frequency range that you'd see on a graphic EQ. So this should look familiar. You've got the low end, you've got the mids, you've got the high end. Generally, I find I get way cleaner mixes and also better sounding mixes when I'm able to have a distinct sound or instrument take up a portion of the frequency range. So for example, a bass in the low end, and maybe a piano in sort of the mids, maybe some of the low mids stretching up towards the highs, and then maybe I have violins or a string section taking up that high end. But everything sort of has its place, and they almost sort of hug each other in a very comfortable way, where they're not, again, clashing or competing in that same part of the frequency range. So the thing I generally want to avoid is having 2 sounds or more competing for that same frequency range. Now, obviously there's going to be some overlap, but you want to find where that distinct, the main sound or the main harmonic is coming from in that instrument or that track you've chosen, and where it's kind of fitting into that space. And then also I find it has a lot more impact when a new sound does come in or a new instrument does come in, because there was nothing in that frequency range to start with or dominating that range to start with, and then you have a new sound or texture come in, and it's a lot more noticeable than if you already had something taking up all that space in the first place. Now, there's ways around this. For example, you could use stereo width and pan something to the left or the right, or make it so that it's wide in stereo, or the other sound close and mono, so there is space in that regard. You can also sidechain things to each other, so one ducks when the other one hits, but generally I find I get way cleaner and better mixes when I have one sound taking one frequency range. And number 2 is quality of sounds. Number 1 is to be getting kits from reputable producers and sound designers online, and number 2 is to be making sounds yourself. That means making your own one-shots, accents, phrases, which I'll get into. Now, you can browse a lot of different sites for finding great sound kits, such as YouTube, even Reddit. There's obviously amazing websites dedicated towards sample packs, sound kits, drum packs, such as Unknown Sounds, Waves, Drum Broker. We've obviously got Splice, which I'm sure many of you producers and sample makers know. And the great thing is, so much time has been put into making those kits from professional producers and reputable sound designers that you can almost guarantee they're gonna be high quality sounds to begin with. Now, a year or so into my sample making, I decided to create my own one-shot accents and phrases kit. This was called Accent Odyssey, which I have since taken down because I feel like I've improved a lot since. But if you are interested in that kit, it's got over 250 accents and phrases, and I can send that to you. Just let me know. In making this kit, it was truly one of the biggest learning experiences and growth curves that I think I've had so far as a sample maker, as a producer, and it's why I continue to make my own sounds now, because it was honestly such a different approach to starting an entire project or an entire sample. It was a lot less daunting. Now, the first incentive was the fact that I knew I was going to be able to not only sell these sounds, but use them for myself forever. They'll last forever, right? And I'm going to have all those sounds that I made, and I'm not going to have to deal with the royalty stresses, or maybe someone, has copyrighted it, blah, blah, blah. Those are my sounds that I made, and that also means that they're in the style that I like and they suit the style that I make. But yeah, really it was just a way to have more dope textures and sounds that I could use in my samples and just be able to drag and drop them into my project super easily. And the thing I found when I was making these one-shots and these accents was that, as opposed to creating a whole new project or sample pack, sometimes, at least for me, I can find it a little bit daunting, almost subconsciously consciously go into it thinking I have to make an entire melody on this piano or this track, when the goal was just to make 250, whatever the number is for yourself, just make little one-shots, little textures, little phrases. It was a lot more digestible, it was a lot easier to get started, and I found that it was, I was getting through tons of these ideas and melodies or melodic motifs, and I think that really, I know that it sharpened my skills so much quicker than when I would spend so much time working on essentially the same melody for a whole sample, right? Because usually you'll have a main melody, but this meant making tons of little melodic elements and textures. So, I got way quicker in my workflow using different plugins, knowing what different plugins did, which one sounded good with what. Also accumulated and spent more time finding new plugins, and again going back to getting great sounds in my banks. And yeah, I just became like a machine, especially when I was in the midst of creating Accent Odyssey, because I was just making so many little melodic elements. And funnily enough, one of the things I found was that all these little phrases that I made became ideas for whole samples, and it actually took some self-discipline to not get caught up or carried away making a whole loop or a sample. At times I did, because I wanted to ride that sort of flow state I was in, but it was like just stick to making these sounds, and I just got way better and way more inspired, and really it just made me way quicker at making melodies, starting melodies, having different approaches for making melodies, again understanding different plugins and what frequency ranges, what keys sound good. It just taught me so much, so I really wish I'd started that process a bit earlier on, and honestly just as a reminder to myself to still do that a lot now. And if you do want me to make a video on how I make accents and textures, just comment, let me know, and I will make one. And this leads me on to number 3, which is quantity over quality in the early stages. So there was actually a study done with a photography class where you had group A and group B, and group A was told to take 100 photos and come up with their best photo, and group B was told to just take one really great photo. And sure enough, group A, with all the photos to choose from, had the best quality photo in the end. My point is, I would have focused so much more on quantity as opposed to quality in those earlier stages. Like anything, like a sport, it's about getting the reps in, and especially in the early stages, you want to really hammer down those fundamentals and the basics before you start focusing on something complex. For example, like in basketball, you don't start out learning how to dunk and how to shoot 3-pointers. You start with the fundamentals, knowing how to dribble, knowing where to shoot from, how to shoot. And this isn't to say that quality isn't important, and finishing projects is also important and a skill in its own, which I can make a video on. But in the beginning, I wish I had just started a lot more new projects. There were countless amounts of times where I spent hours fine-tuning and trying to save a project that just wasn't good to start with or in the first place. And sometimes that's hard to know when you're in those early stages because it sounds good to you at that time. I wish I had just kind of stopped a lot of the tracks at about that 80% mark and then just moved on to something new. And I'm sure you can relate, but I spent hours working on or trying to find the right synth or get, fix that bass that I was using, which, I should have just got a different bass, but I was just so set on trying to fix it. In that same time, I could have literally started 3, 4, 5 different tracks, and getting those reps in again would have just made me a lot more proficient and a lot skilled and quicker to begin with. So I really wish I'd spent more time on the quantity than the quality in those early stages. Being able to know when to jump ship is really important. Again, having said that, it's important that you're not constantly jumping ship and never finishing your tracks, but in the earlier stages, try and focus more on developing a lot of new ideas and getting those reps in. So in conclusion, using less sounds as opposed to more would have made my mixes sound so much cleaner and saved me so much time. Number 2, building my bank of quality sounds would have just helped me so much, as I would have had so much more to draw from and so many more tools in my tool belt, and that would have been very helpful if I'd started that process a lot earlier on. And then lastly, focusing on quantity as opposed to quality so much in those early stages, I would have got way more tracks done, way more reps in, and I would have become a lot more efficient and skilled earlier on. And if you have any tips or things that you wish you knew as a sample maker earlier on, make sure to leave them in the comments. If you put your Instagram as well, I will personally send you a bunch of accents and phrases that you can use in your melodies, in your samples. And yeah, until then, I'll see you in the next one, guys.